Hey guys, tonight we step straight into a lane so cold it feels like the air itself has teeth. You stand in the thin blue of winter dusk on a muddy track between crooked wooden houses, your breath pouring out in little clouds that drift away and vanish. There are no street lamps, no car headlights, no warm square of electric light waiting behind double glazing. Just one low doorway ahead of you, a smear of orange glow leaking out around its edges, like the hut itself is trying not to lose even a single scrap of warmth. If you were really here in this village, in this century, without your insulated jacket, central heating, or emergency hot chocolate, you probably would not survive this for very long. Your modern lungs are not used to air this smoky and cold, and your modern patience is definitely not used to nights this uncomfortable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, tell me in the comments where you are listening from, and what time it is for you right now. I always love picturing little dots of light all over the world, each person wrapped up in their own blanket, drifting back in time together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward along the frozen lane, boots squelching where the mud has half thawed and refrozen into ridges. The wind snakes between the houses, picking up the smell of smoke, animals, and something you would politely describe as not very modern plumbing. As you duck your head beneath the low lintel, the world outside shrinks to a strip of grey and then disappears entirely. The door thuds shut behind you, and for a moment you can see nothing at all. The first sensation is warmth, or at least the idea of warmth. It is not the clean, even, thermostat-controlled kind, you know. It is patchy, a circle of rough comfort that falls away quickly if you step just a little too far from the fire. The second sensation is smoke. It claws at your throat and stings your eyes while your brain quietly protests that this bedroom is ignoring every fire safety talk you ever heard in school. Slowly, your eyes adjust. You are inside a peasant hut, somewhere in late medieval Europe. The walls are not neat brick. They are wattle and daub, a basket of woven sticks plastered over with a mixture of clay, straw, and whatever else was at hand, a building method used across much of rural Europe for centuries. Historians still argue whether people in different regions relied more on clay, dung, or chopped plant fibers for that plaster, but everyone agrees it was cheap, local, and surprisingly sturdy when kept dry. You reach out and touch the wall. It feels cool and slightly rough under your fingers, like a dried riverbank. In some places, it bulges a little where the timber frame pushes against it. In others, it has cracked into spiderweb lines from years of freezing and thawing. Someone has stuffed bits of moss and rag into the worst gaps where the wind finds its way in. This is not decorative insulation. It is the desperate please do not let the north wind whistle across my face at 3 a.m. kind. Overhead, a low thatch roof swoops down, heavy with bundles of reed or straw. A few small objects hang from the rafters where the smoke will help keep insects away. Twists of herbs, strips of meat, and, if you look carefully, a little cloth bundle that might be a charm against bad luck. One quirky account from later folklore insists that some rural people tucked small shoes or tiny carved faces into the thatch to ward off evil, like a secret audience peering down at you while you sleep. Your breath fogs faintly in the air, even in here. This hut is not sealed the way a modern house is. Somewhere up in the gloom there is a smoke hole that lets fumes drift out, but it also lets cold spill in. Every crack in the wall is a tiny border between survival and discomfort. The floor is hard-packed earth, scattered with some straw. You notice how small the space really is. A single room for almost everything. Cooking, eating, working, and sleeping. In some regions, larger households did build separate upper sleeping lofts, and in wealthier areas, longhouses had more divisions. But the basic peasant hut is often just this, one multi-purpose box of mud and timber, trying its best to stand between your skin and the winter. At the far side, near the door, you see where the cold lives. There are faint streaks of frost around the frame, where the wood does not fit perfectly. When the wind gusts, you feel a thread of icy air brush your ankles like an annoyed cat. You can almost hear every draft plotting how to slip under blankets later and bite at toes and fingers. You take a cautious step and feel the give of straw underfoot, hiding little dips and bumps. Even that has a purpose. The straw softens the ground a bit and soaks up some moisture. It is not exactly a luxury carpet, but it is better than bare mud. Somewhere nearby, A chicken shifts on its perch with a sleepy cluck, offended that you have dared to move in her presence. You find yourself instinctively looking for a switch on the wall, then laughing at the habit. There is no electricity here. Light comes from the fire, a couple of tallow candles if the household is lucky, maybe a rushlight, a strip of dried plant stem soaked in animal fat, burning with a small stubborn flame. Somewhere in your modern brain a tiny voice wonders whether your candle has enough battery. Outside, the sky is sliding from blue to black. Inside, the tiny sun of the hearth will soon be all that keeps this space from turning into a freezing box of darkness. You can already feel the pressure of the coming night in the way people move around the room, quietly preparing for hours in which the only thing between them and the cold is everything this hut can offer. You stand still for a moment and just let your eyes trace the hut from floor to roof. It is tempting to see it as one lump of brown and grey, a kind of sad gingerbread house without the sugar. But every part of it is doing a job to keep human bodies alive in bad weather. Once you notice that, the place feels less like a mess and more like a very stubborn survival machine. Start with the walls. You move closer and run your hand over the surface. Under the rough, dry skin of clay, there is a skeleton of thin, woven sticks, wattle, that has been plastered over with daub. The daub is a cocktail of clay, chopped straw, and whatever binding materials people could spare. In some regions that meant animal dung. In others it might mean chaff from the harvest. In others, horsehair or bits of moss. If you had walked in while this hut was being built, you might have seen neighbours stomping a mud mixture with bare feet in a shallow pit, laughing, swearing, and probably trying not to think too hard about what exactly they were standing in. This style of construction is not some odd little experiment. It appears again and again in archaeological digs and village records across large parts of medieval Europe, where stone is expensive or reserved for churches and important halls. Historians still argue whether the majority of ordinary rural people lived in buildings that were mostly timber with infill like this, or whether full log structures or turf houses dominated in some areas, but there is no doubt that walls like the one under your hand were a normal sight for many centuries. You squint at the cracks. In one place, someone has shoved in a wad of wool that must have been too ragged to spin. In another, there is a twist of dried grass. A child's small handprint has been fossilized in a patch of older plaster, fingers spread wide, probably pressed in as a joke on building day. It is an accidental time capsule, a reminder that insulation can be practical and sentimental at the same time. You look up to where wall meets roof. The thatch hangs low, thick bundles of reed or straw, layered carefully, so water runs down and off. Laid properly and kept in good repair, a thatch roof can last many years and shreds rain and snow surprisingly well. The real secret is the air trapped inside it. Each hollow stem holds a little pocket of still air, and all those pockets together make a crude but effective blanket above your head. It is like sleeping under a giant upside-down haystack that blocks both weather and light. Near the eaves you notice little tufts of green poking out of the thatch. On closer inspection you realize they are a few hardy plants, houseleek or something similar, jammed into crevices. In some later traditions, people plant these on roofs as charms against lightning or fire, a living helmet for the house. It is a quirky touch that makes the roof look like it is growing its own hair, which frankly suits the hut's personality. Your eyes adjust more, and you spot the single tiny window. It is not the big glassy rectangle you know. It is a small hole, roughly framed, maybe with a shutter, maybe with oiled cloth or a thin horn pane if the family is lucky. Anything transparent enough to let light in is also a potential exit ramp for precious warmth. In many huts, the window is as small as people can tolerate, and placed carefully to steal a little daylight without inviting the weather to move in. You move toward it and feel the cold seeping through. The inner edge is lined with a strip of old cloth, perhaps retired clothing, nailed or pinned into place. On the sill sits a cracked clay vessel with a bit of fat and a floating wick, ready to be lit when the last leftover light slides away. For a second, you imagine someone trying to stamp modern double glazing into this gap, and the hut politely collapsing in confusion. Along one wall you can see where the daub has fallen away, exposing the neat pale lattice of woven sticks. Someone has leaned broken planks there to cover it until they can fix it properly. These repairs never really stop. The freeze and thaw cycle of winter and spring keeps testing every join and seal. A medieval peasant does not have the luxury of forgetting about the structure, the way many modern people forget about their walls until a leak appears on social media. You crouch and tap the floor. It is earth, tamped down hard and sometimes sprinkled with sand or more straw. In some regions, people laid simple planks or flat stones for working areas, but full wooden flooring is rare in poorer dwellings. The ground itself holds cold, but it also holds stability. You can sense where people usually walk, a faint smoothness in the dirt. In one corner, there is a small hollow where water sometimes gathers, a reminder that the earth has its own plans. There is a subtle gradient of temperature as you stand up again. At ankle level, the air feels cooler. Heat rises, and in a low room like this, the warmest layer hangs somewhere around chest height. That is why sleeping platforms and lofts matter so much. A family that lifts its bed even a little way off the ground moves bodies closer to the warmer band of air and away from the damp breath of the earth. It is one of those small design decisions that can quietly lengthen lifespans. You glance toward the junction where wall, roof and corner meet. This is always a weak spot. Here someone has pushed moss and rags deep into the crack. A spider has decided that the tiny drafts are a good way to bring insects within web range and has set up a delicate trap that trembles in the slightest breeze. If you hold out your hand, you can feel a narrow finger of cold air sneaking along the plaster like it is trying to find the least protected skin. When you step back and take in the whole interior, you realize how much the hut is a compromise. Every opening must balance two needs. You need to let smoke out and let a bit of light in, but you also need to keep cold and wind and rain outside. Historians still argue whether most huts had a proper chimney in certain centuries, or just a smoke hood and vents in the roof. But the common thread is this constant battle between fresh air and heat loss. From the outside, in daylight, a row of these houses might look drab. Mud walls, grey thatch, a few crooked beams. From the inside, on a freezing night, each tiny choice in how the walls are packed and the roof laid becomes the difference between shivering on the edge of hypothermia and sleeping through to morning with only numb toes. You may be used to rating buildings on style points and resale value. Here, the only design question that really matters is simple. Does this hut hold enough warmth to keep you breathing until dawn? You turn toward the center of the room, where the real heartbeat of this little building lives. It is not a radiator, not an air conditioning unit, not a quiet hum hidden in the walls. It is a fire on the floor, stubborn and bright, resting on a shallow hearth that is just a raised patch of hardened clay and stones. Around it, the light folds into red and gold, and the rest of the hut crouches in shadow like a quiet animal watching you breathe. You step closer and feel the air change on your face. Warmth pours off the glowing coals, wrapped in a restless skin of smoke that still has not decided where it belongs. It curls along the rafters, dives, rises, and occasionally decides your lungs look interesting. In many rural homes of the later Middle Ages, an open hearth like this in the main living space is the primary heat source, the simple central fire that keeps entire families alive through the cold months. The fire itself is modest. There is no huge stack of logs roaring like a movie castle. Fuel is precious and rarely wasted just for drama. Wood has to be gathered, chopped, dried and carried, or bought if the Lord controls the forest. In some regions, people burn peat, blocks of dried turf cut from bogs that smoulder with a heavy earthy smell. Elsewhere, they feed the flames with bundles of twigs, straw, and even dried animal dung, a detail no romantic travel brochure feels eager to mention, even though the heat honestly does not care what flavor its fuel comes in. You watch someone crouch beside the hearth and stir the coals with a blackened stick. Every movement is small and sure. Too much flame burns through the evening's fuel and might scorch the food. Too little, and the hut cools, the pot barely simmers, and everyone faces a sharper night. A small iron pot hangs from a hook, just far enough above the fire that it bubbles quietly instead of boiling over in protest. Sparks jump now and then, and land on the clay with soft snapping sounds, and a tiny part of your modern brain looks for a smoke detector on the ceiling that absolutely does not exist. You tilt your head back and look up. Smoke pools under the roof like a low, dark lake. Near the center there is a gap, a smoke hole, where some of it slowly squeezes out into the night. On windy evenings, the draft pulls the smoke up and out in a fairly civilized way. On still nights it hangs heavy, stinging eyes and throats. Historians still argue whether most houses in different places and periods had nothing more than a simple hole like this, a timber smoke hood, or early brick chimneys, but every design wrestles with the same trade-off between losing precious heat and losing patience with coughing. You take a deeper breath and immediately regret it. The air is thick and seasoned with years of burned stews and winter evenings. Rafters are blackened, The underside of the thatch is dark and shiny with soot, and wool clothing has absorbed a permanent smoky perfume that no soap will ever completely defeat. It feels a little like living inside a very determined outdoor grill. The upside is accidental pest control, because fleas and insects do not thrive in this constant haze. One quirky belief in some later rural stories claims that a properly smoky house discourages wicked spirits as well as bugs, since even ghosts apparently dislike streaming eyes and raw throats. You notice there is no neat stone fireplace around the hearth, no mantelpiece, no decorative grate. The fire lives on a slightly raised patch of packed earth and stones, just high enough to keep embers from rolling. Around it, the real safety barrier is habit. Children learn exactly how close they can sit without getting scolded or singed. Wet cloaks and shirts hang from poles above and beside the flames, close enough to dry, not so close that a stray spark can turn laundry day into an unscheduled fireworks show. In one corner, a small wooden cradle is angled, so the baby's feet point toward the warmth, while its face points toward slightly clearer air. You imagine lying down close to this hearth at night, head near the floor while the fire sinks into a bed of coals. Warm air gathers in a layer above you, turning the central circle around the flames into a pocket of survivable temperature. Further away, toward the walls, the cold creeps in, and breath begins to mist in the dark. Beds, benches, and rough pallets instinctively cluster within a certain distance of the coals, because every step away from this center turns a blanket from a shield into something more like a polite suggestion. Fuel management shapes the rhythm of the entire evening. There is no thermostat you can tap with one finger and forget. Every stick has to be judged. Add one more, and you may need to crack the door open to spill some heat and smoke. Hold back, and you risk waking in the deepest part of the night with teeth knocking together. In many homes, someone stays up a little later to bank the fire, raking ash over glowing embers so they smolder through the long hours before dawn. That buried glow can be coaxed back with breath and kindling in the morning. Let it die completely, and you face the cold walk to a neighbor with an empty pot and a slightly embarrassed smile. You glance again at the roof and feel a different kind of tension. The thatch is not far from the smoky swirls. Fire is ally and threat in the same breath. A single spark, caught in a dry patch, could turn this shelter into a torch. Records tell of whole rows of houses burning when one roof caught and the flames leapt eagerly to the next. Everyone in this hut understands that risk and still lies down near an open blaze, because the alternative is a long night edged with dangerous cold. Somewhere inside you, memories of arguing with a smart thermostat about 1/2 degree begin to feel almost comically luxurious. Around the hearth, life folds inward. A low bench sits where the warmth is richest. A few tools lean within reach. A rough board or table waits to be dragged into the bright circle for meals. The fire is a reluctant host, anchoring work, food, talk, and sleep in a small zone of orange light. Your cheeks flush as you stand here while your back still feels the cooler air beyond, a clear map of where comfort ends and winter begins. The flicker of flame plays tricks with your sense of time. Outside, the winter night is long and blunt and dark. Inside, this circle of light becomes its own small world. Clothes are mended, stories are told. Quiet disagreements drift around the coals and usually soften as the evening wears on. In many traditions, the hearth is treated as something almost sacred, a kind of household spirit. Legal promises, marriage agreements, and gestures of hospitality can all be linked to the fire. Once a guest is seated within this warmth, they are under the invisible umbrella of protection that this tiny, controlled blaze represents. You shift your weight, and your eyes sting again. This is not a gentle, scented candle atmosphere. It is a hard bargain, where you trade clear lungs and bright walls for the simple ability to sleep without shaking. For a moment, you picture yourself reaching for an air purifier or a tidy metal stove with a perfect chimney. Then let the thought go. Nothing sleek or programmable is coming into this hut. Here, the only setting that really matters glows on the hearth, and as long as those coals keep breathing, the cold outside has to wait its turn at the door. You let your eyes drift from the bright circle of the fire to the dim edge of the room where sleep actually happens. If you live with thick mattresses and memory foam, this corner looks more like someone tried to build comfort out of leftovers from the field. You step closer and see a low wooden frame pushed against the wall. The planks are roughly hewn, their surfaces uneven under your fingers. Instead of neat slats, there is a crisscross of rope, laced back and forth to make a sagging web. In many rural households across medieval Europe, rope beds like this keep bodies off the damp ground and closer to the warmer layer of air hanging above the floor. The idea is basic physics, even if no one here calls it that. Higher is drier, and drier is safer. On top of the frame sits what passes for a mattress, a long fabric sack stuffed with plant matter. People use what they have. Straw left after threshing grain, in some places dried leaves or heather. The sack itself might be an old linen sheet patched until the patches have their own patches. When you press your hand down, the contents shift with a dry whispering sound, brittle stalks poking back through the cloth. This is a peasant palliasse, a straw mattress that appears again and again in written descriptions and illustrations. You sit carefully, and the bed answers with a loud crunch, like it is biting down on your expectations. Dust puffs up, and your nose twitches. The surface is uneven. One hip sinks more than the other. Somewhere inside, a stubborn clump of straw pokes your thigh with the same precise cruelty as a toy left on a floor in the dark. It is better than bare earth by a long way, but no one would mistake it for luxury. Sleep here is measured in degrees of less uncomfortable. You run your fingers along the rope lattice. Every so often these ropes need to be tightened with a simple wooden tool, or just brute strength, so the bed does not sag into a human trap that rolls everyone toward the middle. There is a popular modern story that the phrase "sleep tight" comes from beds like this, as if people literally tightened ropes before lying down. Historians still argue whether that explanation is true or just a later folk tale that stuck because it sounds neat, but the practical detail remains. If you neglect this job, your spine complains all the way through breakfast. Beside the main frame, other sleeping spots sprawl wherever there is space. A pallet on the floor is nothing more than a heap of straw with a worn cloth thrown over it. A low bench holds a folded blanket that works as seating by day and a bed by night. In some coastal and island communities, dried seaweed or eelgrass has been used as stuffing, packed into mats that trap air and smell faintly of salt. It is a quirky solution that turns the shoreline into one long mattress aisle. You touch the wall behind the bed and feel how cool and slightly damp it is. Moisture creeps through the daub when the air inside is warmer than the mud outside. That makes placement important. Push a bed too close to an outer wall, and the mattress slowly becomes a sponge. Raise it on a frame, and at least some air can move underneath, carrying away damp instead of leaving it under your ribs. The same logic explains why loft platforms, where they exist, are prized. Warm air collects under the roof, and any board that catches it becomes prime sleeping space. You look at the layers piled on top of the straw sack, a coarse linen sheet if the household has one, heavy woolen blankets in muted browns and greys. Wool dominates much of the textile economy, thanks to countless sheep on hills and fields, and it behaves differently from light modern duvets. It traps warmth, even when slightly damp. It weighs on you like a sleepy animal, and it can itch just enough that you always know it is there. On the coldest nights, a worn cloak joins the pile, and sometimes a cured sheepskin, fur turned inward, becomes the prize top cover. Pillows are small and practical. You see a narrow bolster stuffed with chaff or feathers if the family can spare them, or just a folded bundle of cloth. In some regions, people carve simple wooden headrests, more like props than cushions, to keep the head raised and hair out of the dust. You try one in your imagination, and your neck immediately files an angry memo. Little tricks cluster around these sleeping places. A brick or stone warmed by the fire might be wrapped in cloth and slip down near icy feet. A cat claims a regular spot at the edge of the covers. A compact heater with whiskers and strong opinions about being moved. A scrap of heavier fabric hangs on a peg and can be pulled across at night to block the worst of the air leaking from the door. None of these measures looks like much on its own. Together they quietly shift the odds. You imagine climbing under these blankets in your shirt and maybe a hood, not in sleek matching pajamas. Clothes are too valuable to take off just for the concept of separate nightwear. A single good outfit can be one of the most important things a person owns, which is why it spends the night wrapped around you rather than folded neatly beside the bed. The frame creaks, straw crunches, and the pocket of air between cloth and mattress slowly warms with your breath. As you lie in that imagined space, you feel how this bed behaves. It does not cradle you. It pushes back with the texture of stalks and ropes. Heat escapes into the stuffing until the small pocket around your body reaches a balance between loss and gain. The earth underneath still tugs at your warmth. The wall nearby still leaks a little chill. Yet for someone who has spent the day in wind and frozen mud, this rough nest is enough. It may steal heat at first, but slowly it begins to give some back, and what matters in the end is simple. There is something between your bones and the hard ground, and in this world that alone is a quiet kind of victory. You shift your attention from beds and boards to the next thin armor between skin and cold. It sits in a sagging bundle on a wooden peg, smells faintly of smoke and sweat, and probably has not been fully washed since the last warm season. Tonight it will be both daywear and nightwear, because here you do not own many outfits. You reach out and feel the inner layer first. It is linen, the quiet workhorse of medieval clothing across much of Europe. The fibers come from flax plants that needed sowing, weeding, pulling, retting in water, beating, combing, spinning, and weaving long before they ever touched skin. A simple linen shift or shirt is smooth and cool at first touch, and it sits closest to the body, soaking up sweat and skin oils. Historians still argue whether ordinary peasants owned more than one of these base layers at a time, or whether many people simply lived in a single well-worn garment until it finally surrendered. You slide the fabric between your fingers. It is not the crisp white of costume dramas. It is cream, greyish, maybe faintly stained at the cuffs, patched at the side seams. Laundry is hard, and water is cold. Boiling linens takes fuel, scrubbing takes time, and drying in icy air takes patience, so this layer is precious. It may be the only thing between your skin and coarse outer wool, and when you lie down at night, it comes with you under the covers like a second skin. Over that goes wool. You lift a tunic from its peg and feel the weight in your hands. Sheep have provided both meat and fleece, and the spun threads have been woven into something that feels heavy and scratchy. The colour is the colour of the sheep, muted brown or off-white, maybe dyed in a simple plant colour if someone had time and resources. This tunic wraps the body in a thicker shell, full of tiny air pockets trapped in the crimped fibres. Each pocket holds a breath of warmth, and together they turn wool into a kind of portable thatch. Sleeves are long, cuffs narrow, necklines high. Every gap is an escape route for heat. You tug the neckline closer and feel how much of your own winter comfort depends on that small tie. In one corner you notice a repair, a neat row of stitches where a tear once ran. Mending is not a hobby here, it is constant maintenance. A good wool garment may be worn, patched, turned inside out, and altered to fit different bodies across years. A quirky old saying in one region claims that 3 generations can wear the same cloak if each person respects the needle enough. On a low stool there is a pile of smaller things. Hose for legs, pieced together from cloth rather than knitted, hanging like long, slightly sad socks. Brays or simple baggy underdrawers that tie at the waist. A belt that once closed tight during the day loosens a little for the night, but often still stays on, because it is attached to pouches and small knives that are easier to keep close. You imagine trying to curl up in sleep with a belt and pouch pressing against your hip and feel modern comfort standards staging a protest. Then comes the outermost shell. A cloak or heavy mantle hangs from a peg, its hem slightly darker from years of mud and rain. At night this garment often converts into a blanket, thrown over bodies that already lie under woven covers. A traveller might even sleep fully wrapped in a cloak with hood pulled over the head, trusting more in their portable shelter than in whatever lodging they find. You pick up the hood and feel its importance. Modern people sometimes laugh at nightcaps in old drawings, but covering the head really matters when there is frost on the inside of your window. Caps or coifs made of linen or wool are common, worn by men, women, and children. At night, they keep heat from pouring out of the top of the body, while also hiding messy hair that has not seen hot running water in a while. Small tricks show up in every corner of this wardrobe. A pair of old socks, too thin for daytime, becomes an extra layer at night. Strips of worn cloth wrap around feet or shins to add insulation where boots do not reach. In some chilly stories from later centuries, people stuff straw or dry grass inside shoes for winter walking, and you can easily imagine earlier villagers doing something similar on nights when the wind claws under the door and laughs. You notice how much layering matters more than any single piece. Linen against the skin, wool over that, then a heavier wool, then a cloak. Each layer traps a thin slice of air. When you crawl into bed, you bring that entire sandwich of warmth with you. The straw mattress steals some heat at first. The blankets take their share, but the layers you wear are another wall between you and the freeze. Stripping down for bed in this climate would feel like handing victory directly to the cold. You imagine the act of getting ready to sleep. There is no leisurely costume change, no drawer full of soft, coordinated nightwear. Instead, there is a quiet tightening of laces, a check that sleeves are pulled down, belts loosened just enough that breathing stays comfortable. Children might be bundled in an extra layer, wrapped in long shirts that almost reach their ankles. A very small child might share a bed with a parent and vanish entirely under a wool cloak, turning into a mysterious moving bump that occasionally kicks. There is also the reality of small creatures that like warmth as much as you do. Fleas and lice are constant companions, especially in layers that are rarely washed. Combs, fine-toothed tools, and occasional boiling are weapons in that quiet war. You let all these textures pile up in your mind. Patches on patches, a hood pulled low, hands drawn up inside oversized sleeves like little animal paws. When you picture yourself lying down dressed like this, you feel weight, friction, the faint itch of wool. Modern sleepwear feels like air by comparison. Here, clothing is not about looking good in the mirror before turning out the light. It is about building one more movable wall between your body and a night that has no interest in your comfort at all. You glance around the room and realize there is one more important ingredient in the nightly fight against the cold. It is not a new blanket or a clever gadget. It is people. Warm, breathing, slightly snoring people. Spaces in the hut are filling. Someone banks the fire. Someone else pulls a shutter tight. Shoes and wooden clogs pile near the door in a messy little hill, because no one wants frozen mud in bed. Children whirl through the last bits of energy they have, then crash hard when a parent gives the signal. There is no long negotiation over who gets which room. There is one main sleeping space, and anyone who belongs to this household is about to share it. You watch as bodies slot into place on the big bed like spoons in a drawer. At the far side, against the wall, an older person settles first. Maybe a grandparent whose bones protest the cold more loudly than anyone else. Next to them, the head of the household stretches out, then a partner, then children arranged roughly in order of size. The smallest tucks in the middle where the risk of rolling off the edge is lowest. If you want to picture a king-size bed with crisp white linens and individual pillows, your imagination has opened the wrong catalogue. It looks crowded. It is supposed to. Human bodies throw off heat all night, and in a world without central heating, that energy gets harvested. The family bed is a furnace powered by lungs and hearts. When you slide under the covers and press shoulder to shoulder with another person, you trap warm air in a narrow space where it cannot escape easily. After a few minutes, the shared zone of breath and body heat becomes noticeably warmer than the cold air in the room. You are part of a living radiator, whether you like it or not. Sleeping all together like this is a pattern mentioned in records and stories from various parts of medieval Europe. Inventories sometimes list a single great bed in a cottage, and visitor accounts hint at crowded arrangements that would make many modern guests quietly reconsider their travel plans. Historians still argue whether every simple household followed the same scheme, or whether regional customs, wealth, and local architecture created more variety than the surviving sources suggest, but the basic idea of bed sharing in small spaces is hard to miss. You picture yourself trying to stake out a comfortable position in that crush. There is the battle over who gets the warmer middle, and who ends up near the edge, where drafts creep in under the covers. There is the dance of elbows and knees. One child is an expert kicker. Another talks in their sleep. Someone snores with the determination of a distant mill wheel. On the bright side, if you wake in the night convinced that the hut has turned into an icebox, you have an easy solution. Move closer. No app required. Servants or hired labourers, if this household has them, may have their own pallet or bench nearby, but still within that heat zone. In some arrangements, a servant sleeps at the foot of the main bed, curled sideways across it like a living foot warmer, a placement that says a great deal about both social hierarchy and the importance of warm toes. Guests, when there is no spare room, might share too. The idea of sleeping alone in an entire bed, in perfect silence, would strike many people in this world as oddly wasteful and maybe a little eerie. There is a social map embedded in the layout. Who sleeps next to whom tells you who is trusted, who is being watched, and who is considered fragile. Parents on the outside protect children in the center. An elderly relative claims the spot least exposed to drafts. In some regions, there are customs about bed order, rules so ingrained that no one needs to explain them aloud. You can imagine being a newcomer and accidentally sliding into the wrong place, then feeling not only the cold, but several pairs of eyes giving you the slow, no, not there stare. A small corner of your modern brain raises a question about privacy. Nights here are not private in the way you might know them. The family bed is full of quiet whispers, shared jokes, grumbles, and the occasional argument that fails to wait until morning. Intimacy has to be timed carefully, disguised as rest, or relocated when possible. One quirky anecdote from later times describes parents pretending to sleep until their children do so. They can have a few minutes of whispered conversation that is actually for adults, which feels like a timeless strategy across centuries. You imagine the sensory load once everyone settles, the sound of breathing around you, slowly synchronizing as people drift off, the shifting weight of the mattress as someone turns, the faint creak of rope and crunch of straw, the smell of wool and smoke and human skin in close quarters. It is not unpleasant, just very present. There is no sterile separation here. The bed is a little community that forms once the lights, or rather the candles, go out. Sometimes, the crowding can reach comic levels. In busy inns and guest houses, travelers might find themselves sharing a bed with complete strangers, sleeping in shifts, or crammed 3 or 4 to a mattress to save on cost and space. That is more early modern than strictly rural peasant life, but it shows how bed sharing persists as a practical solution whenever heat and room are limited. You can almost picture yourself waking to discover that you have spent the night holding hands with a merchant from 2 towns over, and neither of you has any idea how that happened. In this hut, the shared bed brings one more quiet advantage. Children learn early how it feels when someone near them shivers too much, or coughs too hard. An older child might instinctively shift a blanket. A parent might wake when the breathing pattern beside them changes. There is no baby monitor perched on a shelf, but there is a whole cluster of bodies wired to respond to one another. The same closeness that steals elbow room gives a constant, instinctive check on each other's condition. You glance toward the darker parts of the room, where others settle on their pallets and benches. Even there, people lie close. 2 brothers on a straw heap will drift until their backs touch. A maid shares a blanket with another servant, both thankful for the extra layer of warmth, even if they pretend to complain about the lack of space. The cold does not care about modesty. The cold cares only about exposed skin and wasted heat, and everyone in this space has learned that lesson enough times that they no longer argue. The entire arrangement feels chaotic at first. Then your eyes pick out the patterns. Warmest spots for the oldest and youngest, edges for the sturdier bodies. Anyone sick is placed where a hand can easily reach their forehead in the night. The system grew from trial and error, from long winters that rewarded some habits and punished others. When you finally imagine yourself sliding into a narrow strip of mattress, back to back with another sleeper, you feel the initial discomfort fade a little. You are not alone in the cold. You are one piece in a huddled, breathing puzzle, holding a small circle of warmth against the long, dark hours until morning. You become aware of another kind of warmth in the room, a slower, heavier breathing that does not belong to any human. There is a soft shuffle of hooves, the wet sound of a nose snorting, and then a long sigh that smells of hay and animal comfort. You turn your head, and a pair of large, dark eyes looks back at you with calm boredom. A cow is sharing the night. In many rural parts of medieval Europe, it is normal for people and livestock to live under the same roof. Sometimes there is just one open space. Sometimes the building is divided. People at one end, animals at the other, with a low wall between. Archaeology and old building plans show longhouses that line up humans, cattle, and storage in one continuous structure, a kind of all-in-one survival capsule for winter. Animals are wealth on 4 legs, and you do not leave your wealth outside in the snow if you can help it. You listen to the slow rhythm of the cow chewing, the occasional gentle clink of its tether. Each huge body is a furnace that never really switches off. A cow can weigh more than 5 grown humans, and every pound of that mass is radiating heat into the air. You hold out your hand and feel a faint, warm breeze when it exhales. In farmyards across cold regions, people know that instinctively. If your fingers are numb, you step close to the cattle and warm them on a flank. It is an unromantic but effective heating system. The floor beneath the animal is slightly lower and covered with straw, so liquids run away from where humans sleep. A shallow gutter collects the worst of it. Cleaning that area is no one's favorite job, but the manure will become fertilizer, so even this mess has a purpose. Historians still argue whether the close presence of animals did more to harm health through dampness and disease, or to help it by providing warmth and extra protection. But the bodies are here either way, and you can feel their heat adding a few more degrees to the air. You take in other sounds. Somewhere behind a rough partition, a pig shifts, grunts, and settles again. Pigs show up in later sayings as hot water bottles with hooves. Their stocky bodies give off an impressive amount of warmth, especially when several lie piled together. Chickens murmur on a perch, little feathered bundles with heads tucked under wings. A few may spend the night in baskets hung from beams, safely out of reach of foxes and pleasantly close to the rising layer of fire heat. The air is a complicated mixture of smells. Smoke, wool, sour milk, animal breath, damp earth, human sweat, all of it mingles into something that would probably get your modern rental listing removed. Yet your nose begins to adjust. After a while, the scent of hay and warm hide becomes almost soothing, like a very rustic version of a petting zoo. One quirky detail from later rural traditions describes people falling asleep faster when they can hear cows chewing nearby, as if that steady grinding says that life, for the moment, is continuing as it should. You look up to see how the building supports this arrangement. The side where the animals stand is often closer to the door, where muck can be carried out more easily, and where the cold creeping under the threshold can be absorbed first by thick hides instead of human skin. In some houses, people sleep on a raised platform above the byre, using the animals as large, mildly fragrant radiators. Warm air and body heat rise through floorboards or gaps, turning the loft into a kind of medieval underfloor heating experiment that actually works surprisingly well. There are risks wrapped up in this cozy sharing. A kick from a startled cow, a pig that escapes its pen, a fire that spooks the animals in the night. All these could turn the room from snug to dangerous within minutes. Children learn early where they can and cannot step, which tails to avoid, and how to move calmly around muddy hooves. You imagine trying to feel your way through the dark toward a drink of water, and instead bumping into a horned shape that snorts directly into your face. It is not the kind of jump scare any sleep app prepares you for. You notice how this closeness blurs lines that feel separate in many modern homes. Animals are not just distant farm equipment. They are visible, audible roommates. People read their moods, talk to them, swear at them when they misbehave, and sometimes lean their backs against a warm flank in the dead of winter, simply to thaw out after a long walk. In some regions there are hints of beliefs that treat a favourite cow or horse almost like a second kind of household guardian, standing watch by simply existing. When storms blow across the countryside, the wind hammers at the thatch and finds the cracks in the walls. In response, the animals shift, snort, or low softly, as if complaining. Dogs tucked just inside the doorway bark at sounds only they hear. Livestock inside or just beneath the roof becomes an early warning system. If a stranger approaches, if the barn side of the structure starts to give under heavy snow, the animals react before anyone sees the damage. In that sense, these creatures are not only heaters but alarm bells, wrapped in fur and habit. You picture lying on your straw mattress, eyes half closed, listening. There is the small pop of a coal at the hearth, the slow chorus of human snores, and beneath it all, the deeper rhythm of animal breathing. It becomes a layered lullaby, a soundscape made of shared survival. The temperature in the room is still colder than most modern bedrooms, but all those built-in furnaces on 4 legs are taking the sharpest edge off the freeze. You let that image settle for a moment. Your hand rests on a rough blanket. Somewhere nearby, a cow shifts its weight and exhales another long, warm sigh into the darkness. The heat is uneven and imperfect, but it is here, and in a winter like this one that is enough to turn a killing cold into a night you can just about sleep through. The evening begins to tighten around you like a slow closing hand. There is a moment when the hut still feels half awake, tools not yet put away, a pot still muttering over the coals, people finishing the last small jobs of the day. Then something in the air shifts. Voices drop, movements become more deliberate, and the whole space leans gently toward sleep. You take a wooden spoon and scrape the sides of the pot, nudging the last scraps of stew into a bowl. Nothing is wasted. The pot is lifted off its hook, set aside, and a cloth is laid over it to keep the lingering heat. In many medieval households, the main hot meal comes earlier, but here the remains of whatever was cooked act as both late snack and tomorrow's starter. You wipe the rim with your thumb without really thinking about it, the way people in every century steal the last taste from the pan. Someone passes you a small bundle of cloth. Inside is a chunk of coarse bread, dense with barley or rye. You tear it in half and feel the crumb, heavier than the fluffy slices you might know. Grain is life in this world. People track harvests the way some modern people track stock prices, watching for signs of shortage or abundance. Historians still argue whether most rural families stayed just ahead of hunger or spent significant stretches in a state of semi-starvation, but the way everyone watches the bread here suggests they know exactly how thin the margin can be. You chew slowly, letting your jaw work while you look around. One person folds tools, stacking them in their familiar corner, so no one stumbles over them in the dark. Another knocks mud from shoes outside the door and brings them in to dry. A third checks on stored food, running a hand over bags of grain, pressing lids onto wooden tubs, making sure rodents have not held any successful midnight parties. The light from the hearth throws big, soft shadows on the walls, turning these small tasks into something almost ceremonial. Near the door, a hand reaches up to slide the bar into place. The wood thuds against its brackets, with a sound that feels final and safe. In towns and some villages, curfew bells once rang from churches or towers, sounding the time when fires should be banked and people should stay indoors. The idea is that after that hour, unapproved movement and open flames are a risk to both order and property. Out here, there may be no bell, but the habit of closing up at a certain point has teeth. Being caught outside after dark without a good reason can still invite questions from both neighbours and whatever prowls on four legs. You check the shutters over the small window. The wood is rough and warped from years of rain and frost. It does not sit perfectly, so a strip of old cloth is wedged along one side to seal the gap. You push the shutter tight and feel the room change. The last stray line of blue evening cut off, so that only the deep gold of the fire remains. For a moment it feels like being inside a lantern. One quirky practice in some places involves making a quick little sign with chalk on the inside of the doorframe on certain nights of the year. A tiny mark asking for protection. Here the only mark is the pattern of your handprint in soot as you steady yourself. The fire itself now needs its night treatment. You crouch by the hearth and use a stick to pull the glowing coals together into a tight, bright cluster. Fresh wood is added, not in a tall stack, but in one or two carefully chosen pieces that will leave a solid bed of embers. Then, ash from the edges is dragged over the top, like tucking the fire in under a blanket. This banking of coals is a common habit wherever wood or peat is precious. The goal is to slow the burn, keeping a secret glow alive under pale grey until morning, so that a single breath and a handful of kindling can coax it back into flame. You feel the heat on your face as you work. Small sparks try to escape, and you slap them down with the flat of the poker. There is no fire brigade on call. A mistake here could cost not just one roof but several, if flames leap to neighbouring thatch. It is no accident that many medieval laws try to regulate open flames and hearth practices, sometimes threatening fines or worse for people who leave fires unattended. The message is simple. Go to bed with your coals arranged properly, or accept that the village may wake to a very bright and very unwelcome dawn. With the loud tasks done, the hut softens. Someone dips a cloth into a small basin of water and wipes their face and hands, hissing at the chill. There is no hot shower to wash the day away, just this brisk, practical swipe at the most obvious dirt. Teeth might be rubbed with a damp rag, or with a bit of soot and salt if someone feels fancy. You watch a child try to avoid this ritual until a firm parental eyebrow drags them back. You can almost hear an ancient version of the phrase, "You will feel better once you do it," echoing across centuries. Voices lower into evening tone. A simple prayer might be said in a corner, in Latin, phrases half understood, or in a local language full of familiar saints and hopes. Words ask for protection from fire, thieves, wolves, sickness, and whatever else might slip through the dark. Historians still argue whether faith offered more comfort or control to people in these conditions, but in this room, the act of speaking the words quietly binds everyone together for a moment, like an invisible blanket laid over the entire household. Outside, the village is changing. Through the gaps in the shutters you sense a deeper darkness settling. A dog barks once, twice, then trails off into a low grumble as someone calls it in. Hooves clop on frozen ground as a latecomer hurries home. Somewhere, a gate squeals on its hinge and then thumps closed. Sound carries far in cold air, and you can hear a distant snatch of song, cut short as another door shuts, trapping that little piece of melody inside someone else's pool of firelight. Inside the hut, movement slows. A wooden bowl is placed upside down to keep out mice. A knife is slid under a pallet, handle carefully exposed, so it can be found in the dark. Some households slip small objects, like a sprig of evergreen or a bit of iron, near the threshold as quiet charms against bad luck. You notice a few stems of dried herb hanging above the door, their scent mostly gone but their presence still comforting. It may be practical insect control, it may be superstition, and it may be both. People in this place do not have the luxury of separating the two. The last light from the hearth now comes mostly from underneath the ash, a low red breathing rather than a flame. The room folds around it, shadows stretching and deepening. You feel the temperature dip a little as less heat pours into the air. That is your cue. Whatever needed doing is done. The night is no longer something to get ready for. It has arrived, waiting patiently just beyond the walls, while inside you take a slow breath and let your body accept that the next long task is simply to lie still, keep warm, and let the dark pass over you while you sleep. Once everyone has settled and the last murmur of voices has thinned out, the dark inside the hut finally shows you what it can do. It is not the gentle blur you know when you turn off a bedside lamp and can still see the outlines of furniture. This is a heavier thing, a presence that slowly erases shapes until only the center of the room is left as a dim orange suggestion. You lie on your back and stare toward the ceiling. Above you, the rafters are just a deeper kind of black, hinted at when an ember in the hearth shifts and sends up a brief, brighter glow. The soot-coated beams drink most of that light, so what reaches your eyes is a trembling patchwork of shadow. A little plume of smoke curls along the roof and disappears in the direction of the smoke hole, and you catch it more as movement than as form. Sounds rearrange themselves. In the daytime you barely notice them. Now each one has room to stand alone. There is a drip somewhere near the door where melting frost has found a crack and is slowly making its way down the wall. There is the small ticking of cooling wood, tiny pops as fibers shift after a day of expansion and heat. The ropes of the bed creak softly whenever someone changes position. The straw mattress crunches in protest, and the regular breathing of the other sleepers becomes an uneven music. Outside, the village has thinned to its own soundtrack. A dog gives a single bark, then another, then settles into soft grumbles as it circles and lies down. An owl calls from a nearby tree, its note strangely loud in the cold air. In some regions, people believe that particular owl cries are bad omens, a sign of illness or death, and you can imagine lying here counting each call and hoping it means nothing more than a hungry bird. A rooster, confused by the moon, makes a half-hearted noise and is firmly ignored by everyone within earshot. The smell inside the hut feels thicker now that you are not moving. Layers of smoke hang low, mixed with wool, sweat, dried herbs, and the faint sour edge of yesterday's milk. Your nose sorts them slowly. There is the sweetness of old hay from the animal corner, the acrid note from the hearth, the general human scent that comes from many bodies wrapped in the same air. Medieval urban centres could stink far worse, with open drains and tanneries. But even in a rural hut, the air carries stories of everything that lives under this roof. Your eyes drift toward the hearth. The open flames are gone. All that remains is a bed of coals buried under a light crust of ash. Now and then one of the coals shifts, cracking its pale shell and exposing a bright red heart. For a moment, the glow spills out in a delicate fan, catching on the curve of a pot or the iron hook above, throwing thin shadows that stretch and vanish again. You could almost think the fire is breathing, taking slow in and out motions like one more sleeper on the floor. Every flicker draws pictures on the walls. A hanging cloak becomes a hunched figure when the light catches its folds just right. A pile of tools by the door briefly morphs into a crouched creature with shining eyes when a coal flares and bounces off a metal edge. In the absence of steady light, your brain does what brains do. It tries to make familiar shapes out of shifting fragments. A sensible part of you knows that the only monsters in this hut are unwashed socks. Another part still braces when something in the corner seems to move. The silence is never total. Someone nearby snores, then snorts themselves awake for a second, rolls over, and goes quiet again. A child mutters in a dream, their words too jumbled to understand. One of the animals shifts its weight, and the sound passes through the floor like a slow wave. If a mouse ventures out to test the world, you hear the tiny scrabble of its claws on the packed earth. In a town with stone streets outside, night would bring different echoes. Here it is, a mixture of earth and timber and breathing. You remember that for most people in this world, artificial light is limited and expensive. Candles made of beeswax are prized and rare for ordinary villagers, often reserved for churches or wealthier homes. Common households rely more on tallow candles that smell unpleasant and smoke badly, or on rushlights made from plant pith dipped in fat that burn quickly and unevenly. Lamps filled with animal fat are likewise smoky. Historians still argue whether most rural families would keep a candle burning into the deep night as a matter of habit, or snuff it as soon as possible to conserve precious fuel. But in this hut tonight, the decision is clear. The only glow is the banked hearth. Your own perception of time begins to stretch. Without a clock, hours lose their neat edges. You count the length of your breaths, the number of times the coals shift, the intervals between distant dog barks. There is a theory among some scholars that people in pre-modern Europe often slept in two phases, waking for an hour or so in the middle of the night for quiet tasks, prayer, or talk. It fits strangely well with the feeling that this dark contains more than one kind of rest, with wakefulness gently floating between them. One small movement at the edge of your vision catches your attention. A tiny spark has escaped from under the ash and crawls forward on a fragment of wood. It glows like a single red eye, then fades, then brightens again as it finds another pocket of fuel. For a moment, you cannot look away. That tiny moving point is potential disaster and comfort at once. If it finds straw or cloth, trouble begins. If it dies completely, the morning will start with cold hands and a long struggle to coax new flame from flint and steel. The weight of blankets presses down on your chest. Linen, wool, maybe a cloak on top, all of them trapping a small lake of warm air around your body. You lift a corner and feel cold rush in instantly, sharp and invasive, so you drop the cover again and tuck it tight against your shoulder. Even that small gesture makes noise. The cloth scrapes, the straw beneath crunches. Someone beside you shifts in response. In a single room, no move is truly private. The hut is an echo chamber for every cough and sigh. Far from any city lamps or modern glow, the night outside is full and thick. There are no neon signs humming in the distance, no passing cars throwing stray light under the door. Only moonlight if the sky is clear, and starlight if clouds have mercy. On overcast nights, the dark can feel absolute. Even if you dared to step outside now, you would see little more than vague, paler shapes, where snow or frost catches what faint light there is. That is why the ember glow inside feels almost extravagant. Sleep comes in waves. You hover close to the edge of it, then drift back as a new sound pokes at your awareness. A log in the hearth gives one last collapsing sigh. A rooster mumbles from its perch as if arguing with a dream. The cow breathes in and out with deep regularity. Your mind, given so few visual anchors, wanders easily. The hut stretches, shrinks, turns into a cave or a ship or a chest, depending on how the shadows fall. The cold is never far away, waiting just beyond the limits of your blankets. But here, inside this small circle of muted light and constant noise, you float on a narrow island of warmth held up by mud, thatch, and glowing coals. After a while, you stop paying attention to the shapes of shadows and start paying attention to the shapes inside your own body. Comfort in this bed is a temporary visitor. Your shoulder presses into a lump of straw. Your hip finds the edge of a rope. A foot discovers that it has ended up outside the warm zone and is being steadily attacked by the air. You shift, very carefully, trying not to disturb the people around you. The straw mattress complains with a loud crunch. The ropes creak. Someone mutters in their sleep. One leg is half numb. The other is too hot under a tangle of wool. There is a reason that bodies stiffen earlier in life when they spend nights like this. Joints that work all day in the fields now spend hours twisted into odd angles, pinned between weight and coarse bedding. You can feel the cold trying to crawl in through every exposed bit of skin. Fingers and toes are its favourite targets. In winter, chilblains are practically a seasonal accessory. Swollen, red, itchy patches appear on hands and feet that have been cold and then warmed too quickly. They sting and burn and make simple tasks miserable. People rub them with whatever ointments they can improvise. One quirky remedy suggests rubbing them with onion or garlic, another with goose fat, another with urine. All of them based on the simple hope that grease, heat, or just the act of massaging will coax the blood back into better behavior. Your breathing feels heavier than usual. Smoke from the hearth still hangs in the air like a low ceiling, and every inhale brings a faint scratch at the back of your throat. Over months and years, lungs in these conditions pay a price. Chronic cough is a familiar sound, tucked into the soundtrack of village life. Serious infections can move in quietly. Pneumonia and other respiratory illnesses are common killers in pre-modern Europe, especially in cold, damp seasons when bodies are weakened and rooms crowded. There is no antibiotic waiting in a cabinet. There is only rest, hope, and perhaps a decoction of herbs, boiled in the same smoky air that caused problems in the first place. You listen to the breathing of the older person on the far side of the bed. It rattles slightly, a faint whistle on each exhale. The sound makes everyone nearby a little more alert, even in sleep. If that pattern turns suddenly worse in the night, there is little to be done beyond hot cloths, whispered prayers, and trying to keep the hut as warm and dry as possible. Historians still argue whether the constant closeness and shared air in small households contributed more to the spread of disease or to early detection and care, but the hard truth is that winter nights could turn minor illnesses into final ones with very little warning. Your own skin starts to itch, not from dryness, but from tiny movements under the linen. Lice and fleas thrive in the folds of garments that are rarely boiled, and in bedding that is not often fully aired in sunshine. Combing is a daily battle tactic, picking out little bodies and eggs, but the war is ongoing. At night, when blankets trap heat, the insects are most active. You scratch carefully so as not to wake your neighbor. It is not exactly a luxury spa experience. On the bright side, at least one medieval medical writer suggests that a few lice prove you are still alive and warm enough to support other life, which feels like a very unhelpful sort of optimism. Your mind has been chewing on all this discomfort, just as steadily as your teeth chewed bread earlier, and now it finally turns the day over into dreams. Sleep, when it comes, is not always peaceful. Heavy, starchy diets, irregular meals, and constant low-level stress shape what plays in the mind at night. You drift into scenes of snow-covered fields, of chasing a runaway pig through waist-deep drifts, of trying to mend a roof while ice forms on your eyelashes. The details are exaggerated, as dreams like to do, but the themes are very practical. The cold, hunger, and worry about both keep filing complaints, even when the conscious brain is off duty. Bad dreams here do not get a psychological label. They get folded into a world of spirits, humours, and signs. A nightmare might be blamed on eating too much late in the evening, or on sleeping in the wrong position, or on malevolent forces slipping in through cracks that the shutters and charms failed to block. Medieval medical theory often leans on the idea of bodily humours needing balance, so a physician, if one ever visited, might explain troubled sleep as the result of excess black bile or phlegm disturbed by cold and damp. It sounds foreign to a modern ear, but it is one of the ways people make sense of the gap between how they want to feel and how they actually feel. You roll onto your side, and your arm promptly goes to sleep, pinned under someone else's shoulder. Circulation in cramped limbs is a real issue in shared beds. Waking up with numb fingers is common. In a worst case, in extreme cold, extremities can move from numb to damaged. Frostbite is more of an outdoor danger than an indoor one, but if a person goes to bed already half frozen from a long walk and then cannot get truly warm, all the risks climb. You can see why people value every scrap of fur, every extra cloak, every bit of straw between body and ground. There is also the constant background risk of simple accidents. An ember might pop from the banked fire and land a little too close to a pile of dry bedding. A coughing fit might keep a whole household awake, leaving everyone more exhausted and more vulnerable the next day. A restless child could roll off the bed and bump into a still hot pot. Small things, but in a life already worn down by hard work, each one matters more than it would in a place with a bright emergency room sign waiting down the road. You picture waking in the middle of the night out of a jumbled dream. For a moment you do not know where you are. The ceiling is too low, the air too smoky, the weight of blankets and other bodies too heavy. Then the familiar smells and sounds reassemble themselves around you. You hear the slow chewing of a cow, the faint rustle of straw, the half-audible words of someone talking in their sleep about mowing or mending. Your heart rate settles, but your body still feels every cramped angle it has been forced into. You stretch one foot cautiously, trying to find a slightly better position. Your toes bump another pair of toes. Both sets flinch and retreat. Quiet, muffled annoyance passes down the row of sleepers like a very small wave. Then, almost against your will, you start to laugh somewhere in your chest. There is something absurd and stubbornly human about this entire arrangement. A group of people and animals jammed into a box of mud and timber, wrapped in smoke and cloth, using nothing but shared heat and stubbornness to tell winter that it does not get to win tonight. The laugh never quite reaches your mouth. It stays inside, more feeling than sound, and eventually it melts into the slow drift of sleep again. The aches in your joints, the rasp in your throat, the itch on your skin, They all join the background noise of life that has never heard of ergonomic mattresses or humidifiers. You doze, wake, doze again, and each time you slide back under the surface of consciousness, your body carries all its small protests along, turning them into strange images that dissolve with the first hint of morning light. There is a special kind of time in the night when sleep goes thin, and the darkness feels thicker than it has any right to be. You lie there with your eyes half open, not fully awake, and not fully gone, and that is when every creak in the hut starts asking questions your rational brain would rather ignore. Something brushes the thatch overhead. Maybe it is just wind. Maybe it is a branch. Maybe it is a bird settling. Your ears do not care what it probably is. They tell your heart that something is up there, and your heart responds with a quick little drum solo in your chest. In a world without insulation, you are closer to everything, including whatever might be walking or flying past in the dark. You shift your hand slightly and feel wood under your fingers. It is the bed frame, but there is something carved into it, shallow grooves, faint shapes that only really show up when the light hits them just right. A cross scratched into the headboard, maybe 2, maybe 3. In many medieval Christian households, people mark wood and plaster with crosses or short invocations, simple signs asking for protection. A basic bedtime routine in Latin Christianity often includes prayers like the Pater Noster and Ave Maria, muttered before lying down, and those words echo in the patterns carved into furniture and door frames. You bring your hand to your chest and feel a small object under your shirt. It hangs from a thin cord, tied behind your neck. A tiny metal cross, or a medal with a saint faintly stamped on its surface, worn soft from years of skin contact. Religious medallions and amulets like this are part of everyday life for many people. They are less about grand theology and more about having a portable anchor for hope. Historians still argue whether ordinary peasants understood these objects, mainly through official church teaching or through a thicker layer of local folklore that wrapped around the saints like an extra coat. You turn the charm between your fingers. It is warm from your skin. Maybe it was a gift at baptism, or from a relative, or bought at a distant shrine. On some nights it is easy to forget it is there. On nights when the hut creaks and something scrapes the outer wall, you remember it with your whole nervous system. By the door, hung from a peg, you notice a sprig of something dry and brittle. Rosemary, perhaps, or another strong-smelling herb. Bundles like this are practical air freshener in a room that hosts both humans and animals, but they are also treated as protective. The scent does not travel far in cold air, yet the presence matters. In some places people believe that certain plants confuse or repel malign forces. A quirky bit of later folklore even suggests that witches can be delayed if they are forced to stop and count the leaves or seeds of a plant, as if the universe has decided that supernatural beings have an unfortunate tendency toward obsessive arithmetic. Near the hearth, by the dim coals, there might be a little bowl of water that has been blessed at church, sprinkled around at certain times of year. A few drops flicked onto the lintel, a few over the bed, a sign traced in the air. Not every household has easy access to such things, but where they do, water and salt and smoke combine into a kind of protective toolkit. The official religion concerns itself with salvation and sacraments. At the bed's edge, people also want simple, immediate help with whatever is making that noise in the rafters right now. You pull the blanket up a little closer and feel another small shape tucked under the straw-filled mattress, near where your hand falls when you reach down. A knife with the blade turned inward, or a piece of iron, maybe a key. Iron has a reputation in many European traditions as unfriendly to spirits and ill-meaning beings. The logic is not fully written down in any neat manual. It is just the kind of thing that lives in sayings and habits. Metal that has met the forge is thought to carry a force that less solid materials do not. Dreams in this world have their own creatures. One of the oldest European words for a nightmare refers not to the fear, but to a being, a mare or mara, that sits on your chest and steals your breath. You can imagine how that would develop. Picture someone lying in a cramped bed, chest constricted by blankets, and the weight of another body pressed close, lungs working in smoky air. They wake feeling pinned and unable to move, heart racing, mind scrambling to explain. A presence on the chest is what their senses report, so the language obliges and invents one. To protect against such night visitors, some people whisper short rhymes or charms before sleep. They might invoke a saint known for protection, like Saint Michael or Saint Nicholas, asking that the bed be guarded and the soul kept safe until morning. In one corner of Europe, It is said that placing a piece of bread with a knife stuck into it by the bedside can cut off bad dreams before they arrive. A curious mixture of food and weapon and superstition that would look very odd on a modern nightstand. You listen as the older person beside you breathes a few quiet words you can barely catch. They sound like a mix of Latin prayer and local language, perhaps a formula they learned from a parent. Official liturgical texts and personal charms blur together in practice. For scholars, this line between orthodox and unofficial belief is a fertile field of study. For the person trying to sleep, it is all part of the same attempt to arrange the invisible world into something less threatening. Sometimes, stories serve as a kind of spiritual insulation. Before everyone fully drifts off, someone might tell a brief tale of a saint who walked on snow without leaving footprints, or of a hermit who spent winters in a cave warmed by his faith. These narratives say that endurance is possible, that there are helpers somewhere beyond the edge of the cold. Historians still argue whether these stories made people more passive in accepting hardship, or actually bolstered their resilience by giving suffering a pattern and a promise. You consider how this mental landscape feels from the inside. The night outside is not just absence of light, it is populated. There are saints watching from painted panels in the nearest church, demons lurking at the edges of maps and margins of manuscripts, fairies or spirits rumoured to dance in certain lonely places. The average person does not necessarily walk around in constant fear of these beings, but when the wind rattles the shutters and something scratches the outer wall, the imagination reaches for familiar characters. Your fingers find the edge of a small wooden token tucked into the crack between wall and bed. A rough carving of a cross, or perhaps a saint's initial. It is easy to miss important details in the gloom, but you can tell it has been handled many times from the worn smoothness of one corner. Someone has likely pressed it between thumb and forefinger on countless restless nights, using the texture to anchor thoughts that might otherwise spiral into worry. The fire pops softly under its ash blanket, and a tiny streak of light slips across the ceiling. In that moment the hut feels like a tiny boat on a black sea, with amulets as its rigging and prayers as its oars. Out there in the dark, the world is larger and stranger. In here, people have done what they can to draw a line, to say that this small patch of floor and straw belongs to them, under the eye of their God and their chosen saints. You lie still and let that network of small protections settle into your awareness. A carved cross here, a dried herb there, a whispered formula still hanging in the air. You can feel fear under the surface, but it has things to hold on to. In a place where the physical defences against cold are thin, the symbolic ones grow thick. Between the mud walls and the thatch and the layers of cloth, there is also this invisible layer of names and signs. It may not change the temperature, but it changes how your shaking mind meets the night. Not every winter night in the hut feels the same. Some evenings the dark arrives and everyone folds into silence like usual. Other nights, the air thickens with voices, and the hut seems to swell just to fit more people and more heat than usual. Picture one of those special days on the church calendar, when work eases early, and the smell of cooking has been teasing your nose since the grey afternoon. The church year is sprinkled with feast days, and even if peasant tables stay modest compared to those of lords and clergy, this is still a chance to stretch beyond the usual routine. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers truly feasted often enough to make a big dent in yearly nutrition, or whether the abundance was mostly symbolic, but in this hut tonight the mood is definitely leaning toward celebration. The door opens again and again. A cousin from a nearby holding stomps in, shaking frost from their cloak. A godparent from 2 fields away arrives with a lumpy cloth bundle that turns out to be a small cheese or a precious bit of smoked meat. A neighbour squeezes through the doorway carrying a jug held with both hands, its surface damp from the cold. The temperature inside rises by a small but real degree, with every new body that squeezes onto benches and chests. The central pot has been working extra hard. A thicker pottage bubbles, enriched with more barley, maybe a shred of bacon, maybe a root or two saved for a special day. You help ladle it into shared bowls, the steam clouding the air. The scent of onions, herbs, and fat rides on the smoke from the hearth, making stomachs growl all around you. You can almost hear each person silently calculating whether they should ask for a second scoop, or pretend they are already satisfied and hope someone offers more anyway. Bread goes around, and for once there might be white bread on the table, made from finer wheat flour instead of the darker, heavier loaves of every day. Bread from wheat is status as well as food. It comes from better soil or from a lord's kitchen, and its presence here hints that someone has either been generous or clever. You tear a piece, and the softer crumb almost feels unreal. For all your modern experience with bakeries, this feels like the good stuff. Then there is the ale. In many rural households, brewing is as normal a task as baking. Grain becomes liquid, weak ale for daily drinking, stronger ale for special moments. Clean water is not always guaranteed safe, especially near settlements, so low-alcohol ale is a standard thirst quencher. Tonight, though, a stronger brew makes the rounds. The jug is lifted, tilted, wiped, passed. Lips touch clay, then sleeve, then clay again. No one worries about germs in a scientific sense. What they do worry about is running out. You drink and feel the warmth slide down into your belly. It is not a sophisticated beverage. It is cloudy, a little sour, full of tiny fragments of grain. It carries the flavor of the hearth where it was boiled, and the barrels where it fermented. As it spreads through your chest, your shoulders loosen. Suddenly the cold feels less like an enemy and more like a background condition. Jokes land a little more easily. Stories stretch a little longer. One of the visitors launches into a tale about a saint who saved a village from snow by striking the ground with a staff and making hot springs appear. Another counters with a more earthy story about a ploughman who fell asleep in the field during a frost and woke up convinced he had gone to purgatory because he saw his own breath. Laughter bumps against the low ceiling. A child giggles so hard they almost spill their stew, then are rescued by a quick hand that steadies the bowl. In the corner, someone produces a crude pipe or a small drum, and fragments of song emerge. These are not polished choir pieces. They are scraps of work songs, snatches of hymns half remembered from church, rough verses about a neighbour's cow that once got stuck in a ditch. The rhythm does something to the room. Feet tap on packed earth, hands beat gently on table edges, and even the older faces soften. For a moment, you almost forget that tomorrow everyone goes back to worrying about weather, rent, and harvest. There are little rituals just for these nights. A jug scraped almost dry is sometimes refilled with water and passed again, more for the gesture than for the taste. A special pudding made from grain, milk, and maybe a bit of honey or dried fruit appears, and every spoonful is savoured. In some places, children are given a rare treat, a crunchy bit of roasted skin or a spoonful of fat-soaked bread. A quirky tradition in one region even has people dropping a piece of festive bread into the fire, a tiny sacrifice to whatever powers they hope will be kind to them in the coming season. Eventually, plates and bowls empty. The pot settles, its bottom scraped clean. The visitor's laughter grows rounder and slower. The extra ale leaves cheeks flushed and voices just a bit louder than usual. For all the joy, there is still an awareness that the night ahead will be crowded. Sleeping space does not magically expand when guests arrive. Everyone just negotiates more closely around the same beds and pallets. You watch as the puzzle begins. Regular occupants slide inward to make room. A visiting cousin is offered a place near the warmer centre as a gesture of hospitality, even though it means someone else will end up closer to the draft. A child happily volunteers to sleep near a favourite aunt, unaware that this means being trapped all night under an aggressively enthusiastic embrace. In inns and townhouses, bed sharing with strangers is standard. Here, at least, faces are mostly familiar. The animals seem slightly confused by the increased noise. A cow flicks an ear, then returns to chewing, indifferent to human festivals. The dog, on the other hand, is thrilled. It moves from group to group, collecting dropped crumbs, then finally flops down near the hearth with a groan of deep satisfaction. Its fur is warm when your foot brushes it under the bench, and the contact is a small, unexpected comfort. When the shutters close and the last candle is pinched out, the hut holds onto the evening like a clay pot holding heat. So many bodies, so much talking and laughing and breathing, have added a few degrees to the air. You can feel it as you slide into your place on the mattress. The blankets feel almost indulgently warm at first. The usual shock of cold against your shins is softer. Even your breath seems to carry more warmth, thanks to the ale glowing gently in your veins. Of course, there is a price. The noise does not die as quickly as on quieter nights. Whispered conversations run on. Someone tells one last joke in the dark and sets off a ripple of smothered laughter. A visitor snores spectacularly, producing sounds that might worry you if you did not recognize them as snoring. Someone else lets out a hiccup strong enough to make the straw rustle. Yet, for all the disturbance, there is a sense of abundance wrapped around the discomfort. Your stomach is fuller than usual. Your limbs are pleasantly heavy. The day brought more food, more company, more reason to forget the bleakness of winter outside. When you finally close your eyes, the darkness around you feels less like an empty threat, and more like a thick curtain drawn around a crowded, slightly chaotic stage, where everyone is resting at once. Sleep comes, carrying the echo of songs and the memory of extra flavors on your tongue. Tomorrow will fall back into the harder lines of ordinary survival. Tonight, though, the hut holds traces of festival in its air, and the warmth from all those human bodies will linger for a few hours more, turning this particular winter night into something that almost feels generous. You lie still and let your mind drift, and the winter hut around you loosens from its footing like a little model in your hands. The mud walls blur, the thatch ripples, and suddenly you are less in one particular cottage and more inside the general idea of how ordinary people try to keep warm at night. You walk that idea across the map in your head, from one climate to another, and everywhere it lands, it changes a little to fit the weather. You set it down first in a low, soggy countryside somewhere in England. The air is full of mist that clings to hair and lashes. Here, stone lies close to the surface in many places, so houses often rise from rough stone foundations with timber and plaster above, a mix that shows up in later village buildings and reconstructions. The stone keeps back rising damp from the ground, while the lighter upper walls cost less wood and are easier to patch. Inside, the floor is paved with irregular slabs. Your feet feel the cold of the flagstones climbing through your soles, so people scatter rushes or straw as a sacrificial layer, meant to soak up muck and be replaced when it turns unpleasant. A hearth still glows in the center, fighting not only low temperatures but also the wetness that seeps into everything. In one corner, a chest stands up on low legs, so stored linen does not wick moisture from the floor. Historians still argue whether the average rural family here could afford much stone at all, or whether timber and earth remain dominant almost everywhere. But the constant enemy in this version of the hut is clearly damp. Then, you push the picture north, into a Scandinavian landscape, where winter nights feel several shades darker. Timber is plentiful. Walls are made of thick horizontal logs, notched and fitted so tightly that only thin threads of air can snake between them. Overhead, the roof carries turf, a heavy blanket of earth and grass that insulates so well that snow piling on top actually helps, turning the house into a half-buried den. Inside, the air feels calmer, drafts fewer. Along the walls, enclosed wooden box beds or curtained bunks create little rooms within the room. You climb into one, pull a panel almost shut, and feel the small space fill quickly with your own breath. One quirky custom in some northern farmhouses paints these bed boxes with bright flowers and curling patterns, as if to insist that this cramped cupboard for sleep deserves beauty just as much as any grand hall. The floating hut drifts on into mountain country. The ground tilts, rocks push through the soil, and wind funnels hard along valleys. In alpine regions, houses grow in layers. The lowest level belongs mostly to animals and tools. Above that, a sturdy wooden floor holds people and hearth. Cattle and goats below not only represent wealth, but also leak heat upward through boards and gaps. You climb a narrow stair to a loft under a roof, heavy with shingles or overlapping boards, built to stay put under deep snow. Sleeping platforms tuck into places where roof and wall meet, turning structural awkwardness into snug nests. A small shuttered window looks out over a slope that glows pale under the moon. While inside, the air near the floor is cool, and the air against the rafters noticeably warmer, gravity quietly sorting temperatures into layers. Farther east, the shape shifts again. Winters lengthen into something harsher, the kind of cold that makes breath crust on beards and wooden buckets split. Wooden walls are still common, but the interior has turned itself toward a massive masonry stove, rather than an open central flame. Your hand rests on the broad, warm side of this structure, and feels heat that will last for hours after the last log burns. Stoves like this are ancestors of tiled heaters still standing in parts of Central and Eastern Europe, designed to capture and release warmth slowly, instead of letting it rush up a smoke hole and out into the sky. Sleeping platforms line its sides and even spread across its top. You can stretch out here like a cat, your back against heated brick, blanket holding the warmth in. There is almost no smoke in your face, no need to get up and prod embers in the dark, though the price for this comfort lies earlier in the work of stacking the brick giant correctly. You let the hut drift again until you can smell salt. Now the wind carries sea spray instead of dry snow, and winters are more about raw, wet chill than deep frost. On some Atlantic or North Sea coasts, Walls lean heavily on stone where it is plentiful, building thick shells to stand against storms. Elsewhere, timber frames are plastered and whitewashed again and again, trying to seal out relentless rain. Roofs pitch steeply to shed water fast. Inside, beds and blankets fight not just low temperatures, but also the clammy damp that sneaks into every fibre. Mattresses are hauled outside whenever a rare, bright day appears, thrown over fences and bushes to dry. A fish oil lamp might burn by the bed, its smell strong but familiar, using what the sea provides to push back the night. Diet shifts with these landscapes and quietly changes nights too. In northern and mountain communities, supper might be preserved meat, butter, hard cheese, and dense grain porridge, food that sits heavy and burns slow under blankets. In milder coastal areas, fish and beans and sour black bread might fill bowls instead, lighter on the stomach but still grounding. Historians still argue whether these differences in food made people feel the cold differently, or whether housing and clothing mattered more, yet it is easy to believe that a body full of fat and stew treats a long winter night another way than a body fueled mostly by thin broth. Through all these slides and shifts, one thing stays clear. There is no single correct way to build a house or arrange a bed. Nightly survival is local. The land, the trees, the animals people keep, the stone under their feet, the wind that hits their walls, all of it dictates what works. Every region builds its own answer to the same stubborn question. How do you close your eyes in the heart of winter and wake up still breathing, in a world that refuses to organize itself around your comfort? Cold wakes you before any thought does. It slips in under the edge of the blanket and presses against your cheeks and nose, a sharp reminder that the night never really stopped trying to get in. Your breath hangs in front of your face in a small, pale cloud. For a moment you lie completely still, listening to the quiet. The hut is different at this hour. Most of the breathing around you is slow and deep. The animals mutter occasionally, a hoof scraping, a soft snort, but even they seem reluctant to move. Outside, the world holds its breath. No rooster yet. No carts, no human voices. Just a silence made of frost, stretching over fields and roofs. Your first job is to find out whether the fire is still alive. You ease one arm free from the blankets and instantly regret it. The air bites your skin. You grit your teeth and push yourself up onto an elbow. In the gloom, you can barely see the hearth, just the faintest suggestion of a lighter patch in the dark. You shuffle carefully past sleeping bodies, one hand on the bed frame, then on the wall, feeling your way. The floor is icy under your bare feet. A piece of straw sticks to your heel. Your toes find every uneven patch of earth. When you reach the hearth, you crouch and brush away ash with the back of your fingers, searching for warmth. There it is. A small glow, deep in the pile, no brighter than an eye half shut. Not much, but enough. You pick up the fire iron and gently tease the coals together. As air reaches them, the red deepens. You lean close and blow, lips almost touching the ash. A quiet rush answers you. The glow spreads grain by grain until a fragile, living line runs through the center of the hearth. You lay kindling on top, twigs saved from drier days, arranged carefully so they will catch without smothering the embers. The smell of old smoke stirs as you move. When the first stick blackens and then flares, a small thrill runs through your chest. It is not dramatic, but it is everything. Plenty of medieval households in Europe relied on this simple act of banking and coaxing coals each morning, because failing meant a trek for fire from a neighbour, or the long, stubborn work of striking flint on steel until a spark finally decided to cooperate. As the flames lick higher, the hut slowly emerges from shadow. You see frost glittering on the inside of the shutter, where damp air met cold wood during the night. A thin crust of ice rims the water in a small basin near the door. You break it with your knuckles and the chill jumps straight into your bones. In some northern regions, there are stories of people waking to find their washwater entirely solid, the surface mirror bright and unyielding, a quiet insult from the weather. You move back to the bed and shake a shoulder gently. The person nearest you groans, pulls the blanket over their head, then reluctantly pokes out a face that cringes at the air. One by one, the bundle of sleepers stirs. Blankets slip. Feet touch the floor with muffled complaints. A child tries to burrow deeper into warmth until a stern voice persuades them that the day does not care whether anyone feels ready for it. Breakfast is not a leisurely affair. A piece of yesterday's bread, perhaps warmed near the hearth, a bit of leftover pottage thinned with water, A cup of weak ale that tastes slightly sour, but carries calories and safer liquid than raw water from a questionable source. In some communities, people eat very little at this early hour, saving their main intake for later when work has already eaten into their reserves. Historians still argue whether most peasants regularly had 3 distinct meals, or whether eating followed a more flexible pattern that bent around tasks and seasons. You chew in silence, eyes half on the door. The light outside the cracks is still grey. Dawn comes later in winter, grudgingly. Inside, the fire's radius begins to feel less like a suggestion and more like a promise. Hands are held out over the flames, fingers spread, palms turned, backs turned, trying to convince the joints to loosen. One person rubs numb toes through wool, wincing as sensation returns in sharp stabs. The animals need attention before anything else. You slip into stiff outer layers and step toward the byre end of the building. The cow's breath makes little clouds as it turns its head toward you. Hopeful, you run a hand down its flank. The hide is warm, a moving wall of comfort. Feeding, watering, checking hooves and bedding. All of this comes before your own preferences. Milk will be taken soon, fingers working quickly in the chill, foam rising in the bucket while steam curls over the rim. Outside the door, the first breath of morning hits you like a solid thing. The yard is stiff with frost. Mud tracks from the previous day have frozen into ridges that crunch under your steps. The well or water source sits under a rime of ice, and you have to crack it with a pole or bucket edge, the sound sharp in the still air. In some winters, accounts describe buckets left standing overnight, with ice thick enough to hold a chicken on top without cracking. A small, strange test that children enjoy more than adults. You carry water back inside, each step measured so you do not slip. The jug is heavy, its cold seeping through thick ceramic into your fingers. Back in the hut, someone has begun sweeping the floor with a bundle of twigs, chasing away the worst of last night's stray straw and ash. Dust rises in pale streams when it passes through the firelight, then vanishes. Clothing is shrugged into place. Belts tightened, hoods pulled up. Hands are thrust into coarse mittens if anyone has them, or wrapped in extra strips of cloth if they do not. A few quick repairs happen on the spot. A torn cuff pinned temporarily. A loose shoe thong knotted. You can feel urgency under these small motions. Daylight is a resource as precious as warmth. Work must be done while it lasts. There is a moment, just before the door is unbarred, when the hut holds both night and day at once. Behind you, the beds are still tangled, blankets creased, the impression of bodies stamped into straw. Ahead of you, outside, the fields wait, white-edged and hard. You press your palm briefly against the inside of the door, feeling the cold seep through the wood. Then the bar lifts with a solid scrape. When the door opens, grey light pours in, shocking after the orange of the hearth. Your eyes narrow, your breath fogs in thicker clouds. A rooster finally decides that the world has turned light enough to be worth shouting at, and lets loose a ragged crow. In the distance, another answers. On certain days, church bells might ring from a steeple, carrying across the frozen air and marking the start of canonical hours. On others, the only signal is the grunt of someone shouldering a tool and stepping toward the fields. You pause once more at the threshold and glance back. The fire now burns with a steady flame. A pot sits ready to be filled again. A small child still half dozes on the bed, one hand tucked under their cheek, a hair a wild tangle. The room looks less like a place of struggle and more like a place of return. You know that when the sun sinks and cold thickens again, this is where bodies will huddle, where coals will be coaxed, where blankets will rise and fall with tired breaths. For now, though, you step out into the morning, carrying the memory of that fragile warmth between your shoulder blades, like a small invisible shield, as the winter day picks up its tools and gets to work on you once more. You blink, and the frost on the shutters dissolves. Smoke fades. The smell of wool and animals drains away. You are lying in your own bed, in your own time, staring at a ceiling that you can actually see. There is a faint hum somewhere, the quiet breath of a compressor or fan. A tiny LED on a charger glows at the edge of your vision. If you reach out, your hand does not find rough daub or a rope frame. It lands on a smooth wall, or on a side table with a glass of water and a phone that is always annoyingly alive. You listen. No cow sighs in the corner, no pig grunts under the floor. The only animal noise might be a pet shifting at the foot of the bed, a soft thump of tail or paw on a very modern blanket. Your mattress does not crunch when you move. It remembers you. It cradles your shoulder instead of trying to shove it out of joint. Somewhere, a marketing department has probably described it as cloud-like. You test the air. It is not warm, exactly, but it is stable. No drafts sneak in under a badly fitting door. If you really wanted, you could sit up, grab a little plastic rectangle, and press a button that makes the room 2 degrees warmer without anyone trudging to gather wood. Central heating in the form, you know it, hot water in pipes reaching into every room, only becomes common in many places in the 19th and 20th centuries, an astonishingly recent change when you stack it against centuries of open hearths and smoky rafters. You roll onto your side, and the mattress just accepts the decision. No one else rolls with you. No sibling or cousin or stranger is automatically dragged into a new position by the shift of a shared straw sack. If someone is next to you, it is because both of you chose that, not because there was literally nowhere else to put bodies. Privacy at night, the assumption that you get your own patch of quiet, is so normal now that it hardly even feels like a luxury. If you feel a cold patch on your foot, the fix is easy. Pull the covers up, add another blanket, reach over and turn on, or off, an electric blanket that will never have to be reheated over a fire. Weighted blankets, heated mattress pads, flannel sheets, all of these exist because there is spare energy to weave, wire, and plug into sleep. One quirky little chapter of modern comfort history even includes rubber hot water bottles shaped like slippers, designed so people can walk around with boiling water strapped to their feet like cartoon characters with very specific life goals. You think about light. One finger tap, and the dark vanishes. No smoke, no risk of setting the curtains on fire. The first electric lighting systems begin to spread in the late 19th century, and by the mid-20th, large parts of the world are sleeping in rooms where darkness is something you choose, not something the sky forces on you. Historians still argue whether all this artificial light has quietly broken the older rhythms of sleep for the worse, or whether it has simply given humans more freedom to ignore when their bodies would like to quit for the day. Under your duvet, your clothes are probably thin, soft, designed for comfort rather than survival. You are not wearing every garment you own. You are not sleeping in the same outfit you need for work in the morning. If you wanted, you could wash everything you are wearing in water that comes from a tap and leaves down a drain at a temperature chosen by turning a handle. Somewhere on a shelf, there might be a small fan or white noise machine, a device whose sole job is to imitate the background hum of wind or water, so your brain will relax. You imagine explaining that to someone in a mud and thatch hut who spends their nights listening to the real wind and real water, and would probably find the idea both delightful and very confusing. You look around your room in your mind. The door fits its frame. The window has glass that keeps out drafts while letting in as much light as you want. Insulation hides inside walls and under floors, invisible. Roof tiles or shingles do their work without you ever needing to stuff moss into gaps. Historians still argue whether better housing or better nutrition has done more to push average lifespans upward, but for a moment, you focus on the simple fact that your bedroom is built to keep you alive and comfortable with hardly any daily negotiation. You close your eyes and drift back, just for a second, to the hut, to the crunch of straw under your weight, the banked glow of coals under ash, the warmth of other bodies packed close because the weather does not care about personal space. Then you come back to your own bed, to foam and fabric and buttons and switches, and the difference feels so large that it is almost funny. The joke, if there is one, is gentle. You still have your own troubles, your own long days, your own late nights staring at a lit screen while you should be asleep. But right now, you are lying in a room that will quietly, automatically, help keep you warm till morning. And that is something millions of people before you never had. You breathe in slowly, feeling how easy it is to fill your lungs without coughing on smoke. You breathe out, letting the last of the hut fade to the edges of your mind. What stays is a kind of quiet gratitude, not loud or dramatic, just a soft weight in your chest that makes the blankets feel a little heavier and safer as your thoughts begin to slow. Wind down. Now let everything loosen. You feel the ordinary weight of your own blanket, resting over your shoulders, over your chest, over your legs. The mattress holds you in a gentle, even way, without sharp edges, without ropes, without lumps of straw. Your jaw unclenches. Your hands relax, fingers drifting away from any imaginary knife, hilt, or bed frame. The room around you is calm. If there is any sound at all, it is something small and familiar. The low rush of a fan, a car passing far away, the quiet tick of a clock. None of them are threats. They just mark time while you do not have to. You take one slow breath in and let it out. The air is clean, or clean enough. No smoke scraping your throat, no chill suddenly stabbing your lungs as you inhale. Each breath feels a little heavier than the last, in the best way, like your body is settling deeper into the bed with every exhale. Somewhere outside your window, the night minding its business. Maybe there is rain, maybe there is a city glow, maybe there are stars, but none of it has to involve you right now. The walls, the roof, the glass, all of it is quietly doing its job so you do not have to think about it. You can let the image of the medieval hut drift away, as if you are slowly closing a book and setting it down beside you. The coals cool. The straw falls still. The animals breathe on without needing your attention. That world folds back into history while you stay here, in your own room, in your own time. Your only task now is easy. Lie where you are. Let your shoulders sink. Let your face smooth. Let your thoughts unravel from sentences into fragments, from fragments into soft shapes, from shapes into nothing at all. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. The night can be as long as it likes. You have all the time you need to slip under, gently, into whatever dreams are waiting.